Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to have a really exciting talk about DeepBook. We're going to get a little bit deeper into understanding DeepBook. We have Alonso de Gortari today. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you.
So, Alonso, you have a phenomenal background. You have everything I wish I had on my resume. PhD from Harvard. You're a research scientist at Facebook working on the Libra blockchain project, and now chief economist at Mysten Labs.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to tell you folks more about DeepBook. It's already a live project on Sui. Actually, it's handling around $50 to $100 million of daily volume. There's a very interesting roadmap, and it fits in a really interesting place in the DeFi ecosystem. So, excited to talk about it.
So let's go on a journey to the beginning of AMM. So, when Ethereum first came about in 2015-16, everyone wanted to trade in a decentralized format. And so early on, we had EtherDelta, which was the first attempt at a on-chain order book. And I don't know if anyone here has used EtherDelta. It was not the cleanest experience. It was a little bit challenging. Uniswap also came out in 2017 with the automated market making model, where you could supply liquidity and counterparties could trade with the pools. And that made the user experience a little bit more seamless. But there's still something missing. What do you feel like the space has been missing traditionally in terms of trading on chain?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sort of the way you start this point is exactly sort of, we've come full circle, which is when we first started to have like these decentralized platforms for smart contract development and people wanted to trade in a permissionless decentralized manner. The most obvious way to have done it is with an order book, right? Like people are used to it, like Coinbase and many other exchanges already existed by then. People in traditional finance are used to using order books. So it would have been very natural to just build an order book on chain, as you said. But then you have the issues of the challenges of the technology at the moment, right? Building a fully on-chain order book on Ethereum would have been just very challenging, both from a development perspective, but also from a cost efficiency perspective. Because what order books really need is that for the people that are providing liquidity to be able to send a lot of orders very quickly and basically all the time. There's limit orders, they need to cancel orders, they need to post new orders, they need to rebalance the books, all these kind of things. And so if you don't have a high throughput chain that is cost efficient, it's almost very impossible to do it. And so what people started saying, like, okay, how can we get that without needing to do that enormous tech stack that is not going to be able to do it? And so, historically, there had been this big literature in industrial organization and economics and in applied mathematics and of like constant product market maker models like X times Y equals K and very elegant models. But this was a prime example of like doing something that's very, very simple, but that delivers a very nice result. And so you start getting like Uniswap and Uniswap V1, and it's evolved a lot more, and you have like way more complicated AMMs these days. But the basic of them is like, it's a very elegant mathematical model. It's very easy to be a liquidity provider because you don't have to do all the complexity of market making on a central limit order book. However, you have other things like impermanent loss. You don't get the depth that you get in an order book. You get more slippage, all these kind of things. And so I think AMMs have been very successful so far, and we come to sort of the new frontier of blockchain technology, things like Sui, which sort of lets us go back to those early days of trading on chain and saying like, well, initially we couldn't do fully on chain order books, but guess what? Now the technology is there, now we can do it. And so now you're starting to see things like DeepBook, which do everything on chain, both the routing of orders, the matching of orders, the settlement of orders, and the user experience is very, very similar to what you would have on a centralized exchange, except that you have the permissionless decentralized environment and the global markets of blockchain infrastructure.
And to sort of take a simple example, what is it about Sui that makes this possible today? What is it about the underlying technology that enables what's not possible on Ethereum today?
Absolutely. So I think if you folks were here earlier during the Franklin Templeton talk, Greg was talking about the perils of the limits of decentralized technology versus centralized solutions, right? And so in terms of speed, you're never going to be able to become as fast as a centralized server because it's literally just sitting in a place. And if you have a distributed system across the world, and he said the laws of physics, and he's right, like, you know, light can only travel so fast. So at some point you have a limit. However, you get benefits, right? You get like the distributed nature, you get the global markets. And so I think what you get with Sui is that before order books, because they were very hard to build on chain, they would have an off-chain component, they would have a centralized component, but you sort of ended up in the worst of both worlds because you didn't get the speed of centralized solutions because part of it was on-chain, so you were limited there, but you didn't get the permissionless nature and the decentralized security guarantees of a distributed system. On Sui, you do get both because you can build everything on-chain. The chain is programmable, it has high throughput, which means you can have many different order books that don't touch each other, and so congestion in one place doesn't touch congestion in a different place. It's horizontally scalable. Sui is, and if you folks were here yesterday, Dimitri, the head of engineering, announced sort of the new consensus protocol for Sui, which is really sort of the most frontier you can get in terms of low latency. The testing environment numbers we have is that end-to-end settlement finality from a client perspective is 0.64 seconds on Sui. And currently Sui uses a consensus mechanism called Bullshark that will be ripped out and it will be replaced with Mysten, which, as I said, is a frontier. And so you will get to end-to-end latency of 0.64 seconds, which is pretty much as fast as you can get in a distributed system. And it will give you as close as you can get an experience to a centralized exchange environment in a permissionless setting. And I think this is really the power of Sui, because for those traders that are looking for that type of execution, those type of deep liquidity markets that you get in an order book in a decentralized platform, DeepBook is going to be the solution.
Interesting. Are there any other interesting metrics you can share?
Yeah. So I guess we'll talk a little bit more about the roadmap, but DeepBook has been live for almost a year now. It was launched shortly after Sui mainnet launched, and it's become an integral part of the DeFi ecosystem. As people have mentioned here, Sui DeFi is off to sort of pretty explosive growth. In the last 6 months, it's gone essentially from zero liquidity, zero TVL, to about $750 million, and it's just sort of growing over time. But I think more interesting than the liquidity metrics are the usage metrics, because volume really tells you whether DeFi is finding product market fit. Volume is what tells you, oh, is this liquidity just sitting idly in pools and not doing anything, or are people enjoying that liquidity to do trades, to shift from one asset to another, to power different types of financial services? And volume on Sui has gone up a lot too. Sui is regularly doing, you know, $200 to $250 million of daily on-chain volume, which is pretty high for a nascent ecosystem. And a lot of that is powered through DeepBook. DeepBook by itself is just one part of the financial stack. Really, most of the power of Sui DeFi comes from the strong builders that Sui has, right? It has the several decentralized exchanges, several lending protocols, several liquid staking protocols, perpetuals and other types of derivatives and options trading. And all of that is sort of the cohesive ecosystem that makes Sui sort of be, I guess, in terms of the technology and the frontier on the DeFi side, but also good product. And DeepBook is sort of being positioned as the sort of underlying wholesale liquidity venue that is not facing, it's not front-facing for retail, but rather sort of powers the liquidity for the upper layer of DEXs and other lending protocols and other financial services to source liquidity and deliver sort of a good experience on Sui.
Interesting. So you see this as sort of a fundamental building block for the greater ecosystem?
Absolutely. So I would say like DeepBook is not, the goal for DeepBook is never for it to sort of compete with the DEXs or anything like that, but rather to, as you said, like be a building block. And, you know, as an economist, I think about, for example, I think about the global economy, and I think about the existence of the US dollar and the euro and the Japanese yen and the RMB and all of these currencies. And I think for the vast majority of people in the world, like we don't go to sleep saying like, oh, I'm so happy that the RMB or the euro exists, right? But we do go to sleep maybe thinking like, oh, I'm super happy that I have an electric vehicle, I have a smartphone, I have, you know, Mexican food, I have like laundry service, all the kind of things that we like in life. And the reason the global economy works is because you have currencies, you have mediums of exchange, you have liquid capital markets, you have credit markets, everything that makes sure this is sort of the grace that powers, you know, the machine of the world economy. I think DeFi more generally, but DeepBook specifically, does that in the Sui economy. DeepBook is there to provide a wholesale underlying liquidity level from which the other financial services, whether it's DEXs, whether it's lending, whether it's other payments, other tokenization, other financial services that we haven't thought about. They can source liquidity from DeepBook and make sure that Sui, the Sui economy, and more general, the Web3 economy has this liquidity to provide whatever types of services, financial or non-financial, to end users.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel like that's one of the main challenges when launching any DeFi app. It's how do you bootstrap the liquidity?
Right.
And a lot of people do that by raising from investors that have a lot of liquidity,
right.
And you get a little bit of mercenary capital. It comes in, it leaves when there's something better to invest in. And I think it's really important that something like this does exist for those apps that are building, because right. It sort of solves that bootstrapping problem.
Right. Right. And this leads us to an interesting point, which is, as I said, DeepBook has been live for almost a year. But a few weeks ago, the DeepBook team announced a white paper in which there are certain protocol upgrades that are going to occur to make sure that this can be even a stronger reality. So for example, things that are going to happen is that there will be eventually a DeepBook token. And the DeepBook token is useful because it has a lot of utility in the DeepBook ecosystem, in the sense that if a liquidity provider holds a DeepBook token, they can get incentives to providing market making services on DeepBook. If you're a taker, you can get volume rebates, things like that. And so it's really sort of trying to provide the incentives at the DeepBook level to make sure that it can bootstrap liquidity on itself and sort of do it in a way that's sustainable long term. Can
you dive a little bit more into the different parties that are involved as users in DeepBook and how they sort of like interact with each other?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just as a traditional order book, there's basically two sides. There's the maker side, the people that are actually managing liquidity actively. You're posting limit orders all the times on the buy and the sell side, a given price at a given quantity. That is very complex on an order book as opposed to on a DEX. And a DEX is if you're a liquidity provider and you're unsophisticated, you sort of just provide liquidity, ULPN, and you sort of forget about it. Now, if it's a volatile pool, that's typically a very risky strategy, because if the token price moves severely in one way or another, you're open to impermanent loss because you're sort of on this curve. And so typically what more sophisticated market makers will do is they will hedge through other ways of doing that, sometimes on the DEX itself, sometimes on other places. But in essence, being a liquidity provider, putting aside the financial risks, it's a very simple thing to do. On an order book, it's very complicated because whenever the price moves, you need to make sure that your orders also move in sync so that there's a small spread. And that's why the high throughput is so important. Every time the price moves, you maybe need to cancel a lot of orders because you need those orders and that liquidity to move to wherever the new price is. And so on the maker side, this is why Sui is so important. And this is why the DeepBook token, if you read the white paper, is going to be very critical, because it's going to encourage market makers to update their liquidity and provide them in a reasonable time frame, which in Sui is like very, very fast. As we said, we have sub-second finality. And then on the other side is the taker side, the people that use the liquidity. And as I said, DeepBook is not positioned as a retail product or anything like that. It's not the intention that people will go and touch DeepBook. It's more the DEXs plug into DeepBook, and whenever it's useful for the DEXs to source liquidity from DeepBook, then they can route orders through DeepBook and take that liquidity and act as those important participants in the ecosystem.
How do you see DeepBook as sort of a liquidity venue in regards to like the rest of the blockchain ecosystem? How do you see that journey sort of progressing over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the interesting things about DeepBook is that, today we've talked mostly about Sui, but really DeepBook is much more than that. It's really a wholesale liquidity layer for all of Web3. And to give you one example of that, yesterday we had a conversation with the founder of Axelar. Axelar, the cross-chain communication protocol, is coming to Sui very, very soon. And one of the cool things that Axelar has is that it has a cross-chain DEX called Squid. And so Squid basically enables you to move across different chains or across assets from different chains in a very simple manner. And another thing that the Axelar founder announced yesterday is that they will not only be launching Axelar very soon on Sui, but they will also be migrating Squid to use DeepBook in the back end. And so the way this will work is Squid is going to manage cross-chain transfers using Axelar as the communication protocol, but they will use DeepBook to actually settle the trades. So if you want to move from like Avalanche to Solana or different assets on those chains, before you could move from sort of Avalanche to to Solana directly using Squid. Now in the backend, you will actually do it through Sui. And the reason you will do it through Sui is because DeepBook is so performant and so liquid that it makes sense to have DeepBook as this liquidity hub for all of Web3. And I think that's what makes it really interesting, because it makes it something that's much more than just for Sui DeFi. It's much for like global Web3 DeFi.
So it's not out of the question that this could be sort of a back end for just every bridge that's out there.
Yeah, and even more than bridges, right? Because I think today we still have a very nascent understanding of the products that DeFi enables, right? We're typically used to thinking about DeFi in terms of fungible tokens in blockchain, but there's no reason why that can't move to more interesting things like, for example, tokenized assets, right? Earlier, Justin from Mondo was saying it doesn't make sense to think about tokenization without the DeFi component. And so there's no reason why, you know, once you tokenize money market funds, you tokenize treasuries, you tokenize more complex financial assets, whether you want it to be done in a regulatory compliant manner, you wanted it to be done in a more permissionless manner, whatever it is, DeepBook can serve those needs. And you can go even further. I think the cool things about crypto is you have a lot of more exotic financial assets, such as, you know, NFTs. And NFTs can be anything as simple as, you know, a PFP, you know, an image of something. It could be something more interesting. It can be an in-game asset, but it can really be anything, right? It can be fractionalized art. It can be a PDF, which is a contract for trade finance. It can be anything. And there is no reason why in the future we cannot imagine that DeepBook itself can also be a liquidity venue for non-fungible tokens, whatever those are. Semi-fungible tokens, such as, you know, tickets to concert venues, which are fungible with each other, but they're sort of limited and semi-fungible. It could be also a liquidity venue for that. So I think the ambitions for DeepBook are very broad and very rich, and it's always enabled because Sui has this very strong technology, and the Move programming language is just so flexible and extensible that a lot of this innovation can happen.
And what's your strategy for attracting all those different sort of asset categories into DeepBook? How are you thinking of that over the long term?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think part of it is just, I think DeFi growing on itself sort of is a tide that lifts all boats, right? Because liquidity is something that capital is smart, and it will find the efficiencies in the financial infrastructure where it can be deployed the best. And so to the extent that Sui DeFi keeps growing, everything is growing together, because, you know, even if you're doing lending, sometimes you need to liquidate, and so you use DEXs, or if you're using liquid staking, sometimes you want to collateralize that and use lending. And, you know, in order to do that in richer ways, you want to sort of manage your portfolio. And obviously, like, at least today, crypto assets are notoriously volatile. So when you want to rebalance your portfolio, you need to touch the different DEXs. So in general, all these different applications, while technologically and from a product perspective, they're slightly different, they are sort of working in synergy. And so to the extent that DeFi as a whole grows, like, all of the different parts grow together. And DeepBook is a key important part of that, because as I said, like, it's a wholesale liquidity layer that sort of powers everything. And so I think as Sui matures, it becomes a stronger ecosystem with more applications in gaming, in commerce, in finance, perhaps in social media and other types of interesting things. And DeFi grows to deliver financial services to those broader applications. Well, that will also be useful for the applications that are powered by DeepBook.
Interesting. So this could not only grow to the world of DeFi out there, it sort of can grow to the other application layers that are evolving, like DeepIn, AI, Web3 gaming. I think they have very rich ecosystems. They need high transaction throughput. There's a lot of, you know, different tokens in those economies as well. So this could also grow beyond just Web3 and DeFi. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think if you look at the total addressable market, right, like we're very used to thinking about the size of financial markets, right? If you look at the daily volume of some very liquid markets, like, you know, fixed income or foreign exchange, like the volumes are, you know, in the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. But there's a lot of markets in which we have, I think, a little bit of a less sense of what the volume is, just because, for example, if you think about a game, right, like you can, you know, be in Fortnite or Roblox or whatever, you know, there's like rich in-game assets, but it's hard to think about what the volume of those the trading of those in-game assets is, because it's really hard to trade them. Like you can do it, like there's like secondary markets and you can do it, but there's not, like, at least today, because blockchain hasn't really been integrated, those markets are kind of hard to access, which makes it hard to really understand, like, if everything actually run on blockchain and these digital assets were owned by people, what would be the volume that they're traded on?
And it's like the financial system, all those numbers and metrics are public, but all of these games, we don't really know how much trading is happening in the games because they're all private.
Yeah, well, it's not even that, you're right. We don't know what the volume is, but I think because we don't have the information from the centralized platforms themselves.
Yeah.
But I think, like, even if we did, we don't know what the volumes would be in a decentralized world, because that world has not happened.
Yeah.
And so, like, we have all these restrictions. Is until you remove those blockages and people really start enjoying that trading and those new experiences, that you'll see, like, oh my God, it turns out in the decentralized world, the volume of exchange of, let's say, in-game items is like 100x what it was in the centralized world. And I think it's very exciting to think about how DeepBook can power part of that.
Yeah, and I think, from watching gamers growing up, they're using their keyboards and mouses a lot more frequently than I see traders. So there's definitely a lot more activity happening.
Yeah, high frequency gamers.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so what is on the roadmap for DeepBook coming up? You've talked a little bit about the ecosystem, how that's going to grow. Are there any interesting sort of either protocol level or application level features that are coming out?
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone here is interested in learning more about DeepBook, I would recommend go read the white paper, deepbook.tech. You can find there's a lot of information there. The white paper really sort of sets out what's the roadmap for the protocol upgrades for DeepBook. It's going to have all these cool things, market maker incentives and whatnot, that are going to position DeepBook as a key layer of wholesale liquidity. But also, I think what's interesting is, if you talk a lot of the DeFi protocols that are here, many of them are building on DeepBook, and some are integrating DeepBook into their routers, so that if I'm a user and I want to execute a large trade from whatever asset to another, part of it may be routed to DeepBook because it has the best liquidity. Or perhaps I want to layer a more complex financial product on top of DeepBook and have DeepBook be a part of it, but just a part of it. It's powered by DeepBook, but that's not all of it. For example, if you want to have a derivatives exchange, perhaps perpetuals, where you have like certain amount of leverage, of collateralization, and certain liquidation and risk metrics, DeepBook can power part of that. But you can layer on top more complex functionality depending on what type of product you're trying to enable. So I think it's very interesting to talk to a lot of the DeFi builders in Sui, which are pretty exceptional in that they're leveraging the Sui technology to deliver these cool products, but they're also leveraging the composability and interoperability of Sui, including DeepBook, to build on the parts that are very powerful while differentiating their own products to offer something a little bit more special.
Interesting. And one fun question as we're wrapping up. So you've probably worked with some of the smartest developers, having been at Facebook and now at Sui. As an economist, what is it like to correspond and work with really smart engineers in the space?
Well, it's more fun than working with economists, I can tell you that. But jokes aside, I think one of the Sam, the CDO of Mysten, is the creator of Move, which was originally created for the Libra blockchain, but now has become probably, I think, the leading smart contracting programming language, because it's just much more flexible and safe than previous solutions like Solidity or whatnot. But from an economist perspective, the point I like to talk about why Move is so important and why it's so important in the Sui ecosystem is that if you go to like old ecosystems like Ethereum, where they have Solidity, and you look at the code base of new protocols, every time someone launches a new DEX or liquid staking or whatever, like 95% of the code is recycled, right? Like there's very little innovation. And there's a very simple answer to that. In for example, Solidity, it's just so risky to write new code. Like there's just so much risk that, you may lose assets, you may be hacked, you may have a bug that kills your entire product, that nobody wants to take the risk of innovating. And that's really, really, really bad, right? Like imagine if we had, the internet came live in the 90s, but like, the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Larry Pages of the world, the Jeff Bezos, like they hadn't experimented with new products because they were scared. Like we wouldn't have the internet economy. I think that's a little bit where blockchain is. Move revolutionizes that because it provides a programming language that lets people experiment with their products, and that leads to innovation. So, for example, I'm from Mexico, and there's a lot of people in Mexico that have a lot of pain points. They know a lot of products, a lot of financial services that they need in their lives, but most of these people don't have, PhDs in computer science, and they wouldn't know perhaps how to innovate on Solidity because it's so complex to do it. However, once you have Move that is safe to do it, it doesn't matter if you're an expert or not. You can prototype something. It can be a little bit rough, but you don't have to worry that you're going to get hacked or anything like that. And that sort of unleashes the wave of innovation. So I think so far, and maybe this is a good place to end, is I think in crypto, we've always been a little bit top down and saying oh, this is my vision of blockchain. This is what I think blockchain is going to enable. But the true innovation from blockchain is not going to come from what people like you and me are talking here. It's going to become from grassroots developers that are going to come out with a crazy application that we had never thought about. Just like one day Facebook was created, one day Google was created, one day Amazon or AWS or whatever, Netflix, Spotify, whatever was created, right? And so those are the crazy people that will develop those products. And now with Sui, they have the technology. With Move, they have a programming language in which they can experiment. And that, I think, will unleash the innovation, which will make sure that finally Web3 actually delivers on this idea of oh, what are the applications that can have hundreds of millions of users?
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Alonso, Chief of Economist at Sui. And my name is Mason. I'm with TokenSoft. And thanks for joining today.
Thank you. Great to be here.